Night in the Vietnamese jungle was never truly quiet. Crickets droned, leaves whispered, distant artillery rumbled like an angry sky. But on some nights, soldiers swore they heard something else. A woman's wail, a child crying, a man begging for forgiveness, his voice echoing through the trees, as if the jungle itself was haunted. Enemy soldiers would freeze in place, gripping their rifles, staring into the dark, because this was no ordinary sound. During the Vietnam War, both sides used everything they could: bullets, bombs, traps, propaganda. But one of the strangest weapons of all wasn't steel or fire. It was a tape, a single reel of recorded sound created by U.S. psychological operations units. Its code name was Ghost Tape Number 10. To understand why this tape mattered, you have to understand a belief many Vietnamese people held: that if you died far from home, without proper burial rites, your soul could become trapped, restless, alone, condemned to wander, begging the living to remember you. For soldiers fighting in the jungle, far from their villages and ancestral graves, this fear felt very real. Dying wasn't just death. It was spiritual exile. American Psy-Ops officers decided to weaponize that fear. In secret studios, they gathered Vietnamese linguists, actors, and sound engineers. They didn't write a speech. They wrote a ghost. On the tape, a man's voice speaks from beyond the grave. He says he was a soldier, just like the listener. He fought. He marched. He obeyed. But now he's dead, and his soul is damned because he died far from home, in a war he could not win. He begs his comrades still alive in the jungle: turn back, leave this battlefield, go home to your families before you share his cursed fate. Between his pleas, there are long, echoing sobs. A woman weeping like a grieving mother, a child crying in the distance. Traditional funeral music drifts in and out like smoke, over a low, hollow wind groaning like it's blowing through an invisible graveyard. When the tape was finished, it wasn't locked away. It was loaded into speakers. Speakers strapped to backpacks, hung from trees, hidden along trails, even mounted on helicopters. On certain nights, U.S. and South Vietnamese forces waited until the jungle was at its quietest, when every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot. Then they pressed play. Suddenly, the forest filled with the voices of the dead. The ghosts' cries floated over enemy positions, echoing off hills and through bamboo. You couldn't see who was speaking. You couldn't shoot it. You could only listen, wondering if the dead were really calling out from the dark. Some North Vietnamese and Viet Cong soldiers later claimed it didn't scare them, calling it cheap propaganda. But there were other stories, passed in whispers, stories of patrols that refused to move forward after hearing the tape, of enemy units that went strangely silent, of camps found at dawn with fires still smoldering and food still warm, but no soldiers in sight, as if they'd left in a hurry. Not because of bullets, but because of voices. Even for the Americans using it, Ghost Tape Number 10 was unsettling. Imagine standing in the black jungle, listening to a fake ghost beg unseen men to desert. While real men on both sides were dying somewhere out in the dark, war had taken an old belief about the restless dead and turned it into a weapon. We'll never know exactly how many soldiers heard Ghost Tape Number 10, or how many laughed at it while secretly lying awake afterward, staring into the trees, afraid to admit they were shaken. But in a war already filled with horror, confusion, and loss, someone decided that one of the most powerful attacks might be the sound of a lost soul crying in the dark. Today, fragments of that tape still exist. Played on a clean speaker in a bright room, it can sound almost theatrical. Just another strange artifact from a distant war, But if you close your eyes and imagine you're 19, soaked in rain, standing in a jungle you don't understand, miles from home, and somewhere in the trees, a dead man's voice begins to call your name. You might understand why some soldiers walked away from Vietnam, convinced that the ghosts of that war, real or imagined, would follow them for the rest of their lives.